If you've ever wondered how the biggest deals, those multi-million, even billion-dollar contracts actually come together, this episode is for you. Today, I'm joined by Bora Brännström, who is co-founder and managing partner at Megadeals Advisory. He and his team have spent years studying what makes the biggest, most complex deals happen. And they work with Fortune 500 companies and fast-growing scale-ups to help crack the code on deal orchestration. We are talking about the playbook behind massive deals, the kind that don't just happen with one decision maker, but require buy-in across the entire company. Bora shares what makes Megadeals different, why most companies are way too dependent on a small number of Rainmakers, and how the best teams build a real system for landing and expanding these high-stake deals. And here's the thing. Whether you're in the middle of a huge deal yourself or you're just trying to grow your book of business, the same principles apply. By the end of this conversation, you'll have a fresh perspective on stakeholder mapping, influencing decision makers, and how you can step up and play at a bigger level. So let's get into it. If you're an account manager, you already know this. You're the one keeping the business running. You own the client relationships, drive the revenue, and solve the tough problems for your customers. But here's the challenge. Most companies don't give account managers the training or recognition they deserve. That's what you'll get here on the Account Management Secrets podcast. I'm Alex Raymond, and after working with thousands of account managers, I know what separates the best from the rest. In this show, we cover exactly what you need to succeed. Handling tough client conversations, driving renewals and upsells with confidence, and proving your value every single day. There's no fluff, no outdated sales tactics, just real practical strategies you can use right now to grow your accounts and build a successful career. If that sounds like what you've been looking for, hit subscribe and let's get into it. Hey, Bora, great to see you. Thanks so much for coming on Account Management Secrets.
Awesome, Alex. We go way back, so I'm really delighted to be on your podcast. It's good fun.
Yeah, I was really excited that we had a chance to speak. I'm a big fan of Megadeals. This is, you and your partners have just created this incredible movement, and it's such an interesting conversation around like real Megadeals. And I want to get into what that means, why it's important, and why we should be caring about this. You've got a book, you've got a podcast, you've got an incredible resource up online, and you're really changing people's thinking at the super high end of the market. So like the $100 million plus deals. But just to start off here, Bora, help us orient around the theme of Megadeals. What does this mean? What's a good working definition? Why does this matter to us in 2025?
Okay, awesome, sure. So, we talk a lot about a really important shift in sales and marketing, and what Christopher, so the author of the book and both my friend and managing partner of Megadeals, he stumbled upon probably one of the best kept secrets and problems in the kind of complex B2B space, right? He kind of unveiled that. And what he realized was after working with and studying multiple companies, both in the Fortune 500 space, but also in the scale-up phase, and he created the first ABM company around IP targeting. So when you're targeting, you're targeting individuals on an IP address, right?
Okay.
And later on, he sold that to Dun & Bradstreet and so on.
And ABM is account-based marketing, just for everyone knows.
Yeah, exactly. Mm-hmm. Thank you. So, and when doing that, he had the fortune of working with, like the big companies of the world, like the Oracles and the SAPs and the Ericssons and so on, and working very closely with their top performing stars. So their Rainmakers, their mega dealers, right? And he started to kind of see a pattern happening, right? And what he realized was that when you have a complex deal, and I'm going to define what that is in a minute, something really interesting happens for the sales. And there's a massive shift in the sales and marketing that he started to observe. And the first thing, that what we define as a complex deal doesn't have to be $100 million. It could be significantly lower, but it's 4 key criteria. So the first one is when you have to anchor decisions in a hierarchy. So it's not enough, Alex, for you and I to have a conversation and I have a good dialogue technique and I get you to buy in and the deal is done. I actually have to influence people around you as well, right? Hierarchically. I also, secondly, need to influence people cross-functionally. So there are people, in the functional organizations in the ecosystem I need to influence. And I need people to say thumb up above you and around you, right? Before the deal is done. Thirdly, what you're selling is quite complex. So it's not that easy to just hire salespeople off the street to come in and kind of sell. And the fourth component is also the kind of environment on the client side is also relatively complex. It could be a mix of hardware, software, KPIs, and so on, right? Mm-hmm. And when you start to have these four conditions, we observe a shift from sales and marketing to what we call orchestration. So you need to orchestrate this complex ecosystem, right? Both on the client side, but also many times on your own side, right? And when that happens, we've observed this best kept secret that I was talking about. It's a problem that we haven't seen an exception to yet, and we call it the Rainmaker dependency. And you've heard us talk about this quite a lot. So what we mean by that is when you have these complexities, we see in every single case, there is an incredible dependency on a few people that can actually orchestrate these deals, right? So, and this is true for the largest companies, and it's even more extreme in a scale up, right? It could be a CEO, it could be a CTO, it could be, right? And this is really important because what we see a lot of companies try and do when they're in this high deal complexity space with those four criteria I described, is they try and solve that problem by kind of throwing bodies at it. So hiring more and more salespeople, right? And that tends to fail because it's so hard to orchestrate these deals. So these salespeople tend to fail. And the other thing it does is it creates a very high opportunity cost because the one or two rainmakers you have to hold these salespeople by their hands, and that slows them down, right? So when you have that kind of environment, just hiring more salespeople is not enough. We talk a lot about scaling those salespeople, right, through very hyper-targeted media to help influence and drive consensus in that ecosystem within the buying committee. And this becomes even more important if you're not an IBM, if you're not an Oracle, if you're not an SAP, if you're a kind of a scale up between 10 and 100 million and not everybody seems to know you. How do you build that brand awareness and that positioning? And how do you get through to those stakeholders?
And that's really one of the tricks to getting to hyperscale is finding the mega deals, the anchor clients, these huge projects that are going to get you to new phases in your business, I presume. And so, yeah, so you've laid out here these four considerations around, what does it mean for us to be in a mega deal environment? And I think this is the kind of nuance and thinking that is so useful for any type of go-to-market team, because we tend to just be in this cookie cutter world where we assume, oh, I've got my thing and I'm just going to go out there and sell it over and over and over. But you're saying if there's complexity to the deal where I've got to get approval from one or multiple layers above, and I need to get buy-in, or I need to enroll my peers or other cross-functional people, that's going to be important. If there's complexity of what's the offering? So do we have lots of moving parts in the offering? Do we have lots of complexity on the client side? All those things are going to go into our approach. And the wrong way to do it, or at least we'll say the old way to do it, would be, you've got the one person who's been with the company for 40 years and we're like parachuting them into these deals as the Rainmaker, or you hire someone out of government, or you hire someone from, whatever to come in and be your Rainmaker. But you're obviously introducing risk in your own business when you're doing that, right? Because you now have one single failure point with the Rainmaker itself. And so what I'm hearing from you guys is you're saying we're therefore trying to help companies to professionalize this. And that's, to me, when I hear you say orchestration, that's what I'm thinking of. Like, we're building a system around all this stuff so that we can go out there and confidently manage and conquer like large, complex, multi-stakeholder deals.
Exactly. And if you add 100%, you explained it perfectly, Alex. And if you're an IBM or an Oracle or these type of companies, first of all, you already have a strong brand. You're always invited to the table. Secondly, most of the really high performing mega dealers are stuck in those companies because they're paying them a fortune, right? To not leave. Right. And thirdly, they tend to have the resources to spend a lot of money on targeting and hyper-targeted media. But if you're a scale-up between 10 and 100 million SEK, so that would be between 1 and 10 million euros, whatever the currency is, you don't have that luxury. I mean, it's really hard for you to attract the best and pay for the best Rainmakers. It's your brand is not already known, so you're not always invited to the table. And to create that type of hyper-targeted media that an IBM and Oracle does, you need to spend an arm and a leg, right? So what do you do, right, when you're in that environment? How do you operate, right?
And what was the realization here for you that said, because I could imagine when you're starting to think about mega deals and you and Chris and your partners are going through and saying, all right, we're coming up with a number of different interesting ways to think about this and different offerings and so on. I can imagine you thought, well, look, we could write a book, or we could do a training company, or we could be a services company in this area. But what was the point at which you realized, you know what, it's media, it's advertising, it is kind of account-based marketing on steroids, if we can call it that. Yep. That's what's going to be something that people can very quickly adopt to get results. Like, how did you determine that was going to be the thing that was going to work for you?
Well, I mean, there is so if you're in that space, right, in the high deal complexity space, and you're a scale up, and that just throwing more and more salespeople on this is probably not going to work because they're going to fail. So then you need, and if I'll add one more piece, Alex, before I answer that. There is another actually thing at play that we identify. So apart from the Rainmaker dependency, I think you've read about this. We talk about finite and infinite markets, right? So yeah. So let me just explain that before I answer your question. So that's the second powerful market force. So what we mean by that is, if you're an infinite market, you have maybe hundreds and millions of potential customers out there. So, I mean, you're a Spotify, you're a Netflix, etc. Right? But and what many people do when you have an infinite market is that they are using techniques like cold calling, automated emails. I mean, you get these automated emails. I don't know how many times a week do you get them, right? It's like, dear Alex, buy my stuff. I don't know how many of those do you actually even open and read, and let alone buy. Like zero, right? I mean, we're sick of it, right? So now, using those kind of techniques in an infinite market, I even don't think it's ideal to do it there. But the thing is, there you even if you we call it burning bridges. So we call it the burning bridges rate, right? We kind of created a new KPI. You burn a lot of bridges by using these type of techniques, right? In an infinite market, it's not ideal. But if you start to do that in a finite market, so let's say that your target market, which is 80% of your revenue, is 100, 200, 500, whatever. It's a finite set of clients. If you start using those type of marketing and outreach techniques in a finite market, and it's a train wreck because you're burning bridges in a finite market, and it's very, how it is, Alex. It's very hard to come back and say, oh, by the way, I forget about this really crappy email I sent you. I'm calling you now, right?
Right. Yeah. Right. Yeah. So, ignore all my previous spam messages. This time I'm serious. Yeah.
Exactly. So when you have the Rainmaker dependency, so you're in the high complexity deal space, and you also have a finite market. It's like, and you're an unknown brand, you're a scale up and an unknown brand. What on earth do you do, right? So back to your question about media. So it's just throwing bodies at this, it kind of fails, right? So by actually using and I mean, there's tons of research out there on marketing and media and building brand awareness and positioning. So I'm not going to cite you all the statistics around that. But The trick is, how do you use what we call hyper-targeted media? So how can I, without annoying and burning bridges, how can I start to influence this ecosystem of buyers that I, as the Rainmaker, am trying to orchestrate on the ground? How can I make sure that they see me, they see my face, they see my brand, they see my positioning and messaging, and they get curious? How can I create that effect around the deal teams, around the Rainmaker teams, so that when the Rainmaker actually contacts them, or in your space, we're talking about how do I grow the account? So let's say I've landed the deal, right? I now have a huge opportunity to expand the deal. And just to be clear, when we look across the Megadeal space, the biggest opportunity is not in the land, it's in the expand, right?
For sure.
Because first you need to land and build trust and things like this, but then the big opportunity comes, right? So how do I then start to expand myself into new countries, into new products, into new functions, into new areas, right? Um, and so a really effective way of doing it is using what we call hyper-targeted media. So it's targeting these individuals so that they're subtly seeing you day in, day out. Many of the decision makers you're not getting to are actually seeing you day in, day out. And they're starting to get interested and engaged with your content, right? So that's that's
Well,
the
and
trade.
the economics are important here. So if my average contract value is $10,000, I'm not going to be doing this, right? So if I'm out there and my goal is to acquire 2,000 new customers this year at $10,000 a piece, it doesn't make sense for me to have this level of attention and personalization on what I'm doing. If, on the other hand, my entire year is based on 3 projects working, right, and each one of them is very, very large, then yeah, I'm going to be indexed toward really getting a hold of all the people. Now, so it's important for us to clarify for the listeners, like what type of business this is appropriate for. Can you give us an example? I can think in my head of examples of mega deals, but I want to hear from you. Like, what does a mega deal actually look like? Are we talking about people building power plants? Are we talking about like new cities? Are we talking about some startup
No,
trying to sell something into the aviation space and they want to crack into, kind of a consolidated market? Like, what's an example of a mega deal?
Yeah, I'll answer that. I just wanted to add one thing to what you said before about, 2,000 deals at 10,000. So just to add, it's the complexity, right? So as soon as the complexity starts to go low, so when you don't have to influence all these different hierarchical functional stakeholders, you don't have to, what you're selling is not that complex. And maybe the sign-off person and the budget owner is the same, or it's just one level up, right? It's not like 5 levels up or 6 levels up, right? As the complexity comes down, you're absolutely right. Like actually, salespeople works pretty well in that environment. So you have territory sales, you have people running around knocking on doors and things like this. So yeah, I just wanted to. It's also a complexity play. I agree with you 100%. So from companies that are selling to DSOs, so kind of electricity firms that are kind of these massive electricity plants that are distributing electricity to consumers, right? I mean, that's a nightmare. First of all, they're kind of mostly government owned, and secondly, you need to really anchor decisions across multiple layers, right, and get buy-in from everyone. But we also work with companies that are selling SaaS solutions to insurance companies, right? So again, you still need to anchor a few decisions, but the ecosystem maybe isn't 40, 50 people. It's, I don't know, 10 people, right? Or 5 people even that need to be on board. So it could both be big sustainability projects that are selling to either cities or selling solar deployment panels, building those kind of things. But it could also be SaaS companies, that are selling SaaS products to insurance companies or fintech solutions, right? But they still need to, in the financial institution or the insurance environment, they still need to. They're unknown, so the brand is unknown, right? They're a complete new player on the market, and they still need to anchor decisions in pretty conservative companies, right? That are pretty skeptical to new things.
Got it. Now, one of the things that I talk about with a lot of account management teams is how they approach their stakeholder maps, right? So stakeholder management, which is a big deal for anyone in a post-sales role, because during the sale, we might have a window into this many people, and then the sale happens, and all of a sudden we see there's all these other stakeholders who might have been behind the scenes at the beginning, or maybe they're just new people who we need to meet, et cetera. And so, we spend a lot of time as account managers saying, what's the right strategy to approach an org chart? And I always see that there are 2 big issues when it comes to how account managers manage their existing customers on a contact level. Number 1 is we are too dependent on a small number of people.
100%.
Right? We talk to 1 or 2 people and we declare victory. Right? Hey, I talked to Charlie and I talked to Julie, and boom, that's all I need to do. So that's one thing, which obviously inserts all sorts of risks into the system, because if that person leaves or changes jobs or their interests move on, whatever it is, that can be a big issue for us. The other challenge that I see a lot of people having is we are way too far down in the org chart. So we're happy talking with manager level people, individual contributors. But basically, this is a bias that we have where we like to talk to the people who are nice to us and they return our phone calls and we have a good chat. Yeah. And maybe we lack the confidence to call on the C-suite or the executives. Right. Now, I know that within the Megadeals framework, like there's this whole idea of stakeholder management is absolutely critical to what you're doing. How do you think about that? What is your advice for teams when they're looking at, here's my contact map, here's all the people? Like, how do we even start in some of these deals where it's just so much information and so many moving parts?
Yeah. That's a brilliant question. So one of the things we offer to our clients is actually, as part of our offering, is stakeholder mapping. So a client will come to us and say, look, here are the top 100 we want to either win or expand. So land or expand. And then what they'll tell us is, what we will always ask them, Alex, is what we call the ISM. So the ideal stakeholder map. And what we mean by that is, what are the roles, both functionally and hierarchically, that influence directly or indirectly your deal, right? The second you start to open that can of worms, they need to kind of think through that and go, okay, whoa, well, actually, first of all, I'm selling into, I'm just making this up, I'm selling into the finance team, so the CFO and the finance people below, but we also have the tech team, and the leader of that tech team needs to approve, because they then need to send it down to their people down here to do the analysis, but then they come back to the CIO or whoever. But then we also realize that it also needs to get into the leadership team, right? So once the heads of tech and finance have given an approval and their teams have kind of done the analysis and come with a recommendation, that needs to go into the leadership team, right? And so we also explain the big difference between owning a budget and a sign-off, right? So I used to work for American Express. I had a budget of, I could have a budget of €1 million, right? But I could only spend 100K. The second I need to spend 101, I need to go to my boss, right? Mm-hmm. But here's the other interesting thing. If I need to spend 200, my boss needs to go to his or her boss, right? So, because sometimes salespeople go, oh, no, the guy I'm speaking to owns the budget. Yeah, they own the budget, but they're not sign-off. So, and when a deal gets really big, it goes up to, C-suite that has to approve. That could be 5 or 6 levels up, or 2 or 3 levels up, or whatever.
Or sometimes the entire board of directors has to approve.
Exactly. Depending on how much change and whatever it is, right? So as we start to look at the ideal stakeholder map, we start to help our clients to kind of really understand what are the different, both hierarchically and functionally, roles that not only make the decision, but actually influences the decision, right? And when we're done with that exercise, they kind of go, oh, wow, that's actually quite a lot of people. To make things even more complex, Alex, in our world, when we're looking at complex deals, what we also see, and I'm sure you read this in the Megadeals book, is not only are there stakeholders in the client organization influencing decision, but also stakeholders outside the client organization that's also influencing this. It could be consultants that are advising on a tech solution. It could be government that are making regulatory decisions, right? It could
be their customers, I presume.
It could be their. You have exactly. We have some cases we're working with clients. My God, if you looked at that ecosystem, it would frighten you. So we, and this is what we call the ideal stakeholder map. So we help our clients to kind of, do they really understand the ideal stakeholder map? And then once they've mapped that out, both internally in the client organization, but also externally, once we have that information, we actually do the research for them. So for those 100 accounts, both for growth and land, we kind of say, okay, here are I'm just making this up, the 1,500 individuals for these 100 that, need to see you, hear you, and that you need to kind of get thumbs up on. So I'm not sure if that helped answer your question.
Well, so that was, so that's about understanding what the big picture of all the stakeholders looks like.
Yeah.
Then from an engagement point of view, one of the challenges that we always have is access, right? How do we get a hold of the people who are going to be the sign-off authority or the budget authority? How do we get a hold of the people who are going to approve the contracts and so on? Yeah. What are your, how do we do it? This is one of these things, Bora, where every boss in the history of the world just said to their people, go call hire, right? Go call up to their boss.
Yeah.
How do we actually do that? How do we engage? How do we have the credibility, legitimacy to have that conversation?
So let's talk about it from an account management standpoint, because that's kind of what this podcast is about, right? It could be quite interesting to apply it there, yeah? Because normally we talk a lot about how you land a deal, but let's talk about how we apply it on an expand, right? So the first key thing, as I said, is to map out. So let's say I've landed a deal. I'm just making this up, in a function in Sweden, right? I've done the proof of concept. Everybody loves it, right? Now, the first thing I need to do is I first need to understand through my contacts and Trojan horses and champions where I've actually landed the deal, right? Where in the rest of the organization, functionally, it could be product-wise, it could be geographically, right? Where do I have the other pockets of stakeholders that I need to map out that I could go to next, right? So, and this exercise is seldomly done when we look at a lot of our clients, right? The next thing I would recommend in this scenario, you've already landed the deal. Let's assume the client is happy with your product, right? This is such an underused technique. It's using reference cases from the internal land deal to open up the doors and refer you to the expand stakeholders, whether it's in another country or another function, right? Boom. So now, they kind of go, look, we landed, we worked with these guys for a year. The stuff they've been doing is amazing, blah, 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 blah. You should talk to these guys. Now, all of a sudden that's trust, because all of a sudden you already have the reference. It's already somebody from the same company and they're opening up the door, right? What we recommend on top of that, and this is kind of what we do, Alex, is that you very early start to target with your media the key individuals in these other pockets in the organization, so that when they're going online, when they're going on LinkedIn, when they're going on Instagram, when they're going on Facebook, they're actually seeing you, they're seeing your company, they're seeing. If you can even get a reference from the land deal, like we do that with our clients. So they do reference ads. So they get the land individual senior person to go on an ad and say, a short kind of message that kind of is really pointy. And then it's quite cheeky. We start to target the potential expand opportunities in this company. Can you imagine? You're like sitting, I'm in Sweden, I'm sitting in France, and I'm going online, and I'm kind of, that's my colleague.
Right.
They're talking about Megadeals. What the hell? They solved that. And then what they do then is most of the time they click on the ad, right? And then when they click on the ad, they end up.
Yeah, they pick up their phone and they call you. So you're using these internal references to build the case for what you're doing. Wow.
Exactly. So we're building the brand awareness and positioning with other pockets of but we've done our homework. So we kind of, where are, with our Trojans and champions in the land deal, we've already kind of like, who are the people? And then so they see you, and then you get your Trojan or champion here to talk to that person and introduce you. Now, so first they're seeing you, they're quite interested. You're building trust because it's somebody they trust in Sweden, right? They're sitting in France. And all of a sudden that person is reaching out to you saying you should talk to these guys. They've already seen the ads and the media, right? And then you have the meeting and you run the process. And then you do exactly the same in the other pockets of the expand opportunities, right? And all of a sudden you're growing and growing. And now you go to Germany and they're like, you're doing this in the Nordics and in France? Wow, what are you doing? And then so combining the on the ground sales efforts, and this is where salespeople or the Rainmakers need to be more proactive. We tend to see such a missed opportunity in many cases where they've landed a deal, but then they're reactive. Like they're not proactively identifying the pockets of opportunity, using the champions, targeting these people, creating reference cases, right? And kind of proactively orchestrating that expand strategy. And that's kind of, I'm not saying it's easy, but landing the deal is harder, right? Once you're kind of in and assuming you're doing a good job and they're happy with what you do, otherwise it's a tough climb. Being really disciplined and smart about how you start to structure the orchestration on the expand should be a great exercise, and that's where the huge opportunity is from a revenue perspective.
Well, so I mean, first the expression is mine the gold you've got, right? So you already won the customer. Exactly. You're sitting on a gold mine. go get
Exactly.
out there and
Yeah.
get to work.
Yeah.
I come across account managers often, and they'll say things like, "Oh, our company, our clients are Amazon, Google, Facebook, and whatever." And I think, okay, so what do you mean, right? And it turns out that it's some tiny division, some team of a division of a geography of a this of a that
Yeah.
somewhere. It's a team of 6 people who's using their product or whatever it is. And I think you could make your entire business just selling to Amazon and Google and Facebook and whoever. And so the hard thing then is to figure out, well, who are these people? And so you're coming in with the ISM, the ideal stakeholder map, to say, well, here's what that looks like. Now, this is not an account manager who's sitting back and putting his feet up on the desk and then hoping everything comes in. This is not a hands-off activity, right? This is, I'm dedicated, I'm committed, I'm being proactive, I'm thinking about it. But this is the difference between 2x growth and 10x growth.
100%.
Right? So that's can we crack this nut? And so I really like the way you're saying, use some of these tools and ideas to increase the visibility of your projects, make your champion look like a hero so that they get the phone calls internally about all the great things that they're doing. And then don't advertise to the new people. Like if you make a great ad about, what you've done for some team at Google, then retarget that ad to everybody at Google, because they're going to be even more interested about the results, and they have presumably the same problems or ability to pay or what have you.
Yeah, and there's another 100%, and there's another thing at play here. So if you're selling a consumer product, there are many emotions in play, right? If you're buying a bag, you're like, does it feel good? Does it look nice? Does it, right? But in B2B, there actually is only one emotion, and that's fear. Right? So fear of making the wrong decision. You don't go to your boss and go, I talk to these guys and they feel good, or I like the way they look. I mean, your boss will be like, what's wrong with you, right? So your boss is going to go, okay, have you looked at the other alternatives? What's the pros and cons? Where are the risks and all this stuff, right? So the problem is when you're not an established brand, even more if you're a new category solution, the fear alarm bells are going off, right? And this person in France is sitting around going, do I really dare to work with this unknown company and this unknown brand, especially if it's a new category, nobody else is doing it? What if I get this wrong and I spend all this money? I'll probably get fired. So many of the deals are lost because of this, right? It's this, you don't get fired for buying from IBM. IBM may not be the best solution, but at least I won't get, if something goes wrong with IBM, I won't get fired, right? So you have this fear. It's constantly what and especially when you're an unknown brand and you're trying to kind of get in to some of the bigger companies. Now, how do you overcome that fear? Well, one of the biggest powers is a reference case from your brother or your sister, right? Somebody you really know in the industry. And it's even more powerful if it's a colleague of yours, right? So if you know that the Swedish organization, this is just an example, has used this and they're happy with it, and you know that the senior VP in the Swedish organization is endorsing this, right? What's that doing? It's lowering the fear factor. And if I'm in France, I'm going, they're doing this in Sweden. And, John, the VP of blah, 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 he says it's great. And then, my VP calls up the other VP and goes, hey, I heard about this unknown. No, but they're amazing. They're professional. They've done a good job and blah, blah, blah. Now, what's happening just by using that, the targeting of the ads and making it kind of visible that my brothers and sisters in Sweden are using this product, right? Just completely lowers the fear factor, especially if you are an unknown brand. So that's a really important force in the market at play when you are a scale up trying to fight your way through everyone else and competing against some of the larger brands.
So for those of you who are listening who are in account management and you're looking at a big complicated stakeholder map, I want you to do exactly what Bora is saying. Do the extra work to figure out what's our ISM, so what's our ideal stakeholder map. Do the internal referencing before you go run around spending on marketing to new customers. Do the internal referencing. Figure out how to make these connections for the clients. This is the difference between a company that just grows like this, 2x steady growth, and a company that really hits something and experiences exciting growth. So do this. Take on this challenge. All right, Bora. Let me ask about how we pull these pieces together. So, you mentioned deal orchestration, and there's so many moving parts to a go-to-market team right now, right? So you've got everything from SDRs and BDRs to a marketing team. Maybe you're doing account-based marketing. You've got account management, maybe key account management, customer success. You've got Rainmakers, enterprise reps, standard reps, this, that, and the other. It's complicated. There's a lot of stuff out there. When you think of orchestration, what are the quick wins here? How do we just get started? Because to a lot of people, it just looks so complicated.
So first of all, orchestration, I think, applies when you have, we talked about that, the high deal complexity, and I think especially if you have a finite market, right? So I think that's number one. It is important, I think, in that space that you have a good Rainmaker. Like if you're selling
some charismatic seller who can be very convincing, who's got a lot of domain expertise. What's the definition of a Rainmaker?
Actually, it doesn't have to be charismatic, to be honest. They could even be introverts. It's more about it's understanding how to orchestrate these deals. The interesting thing was when Chris was working with some of these really high-performing mega dealers that were interviewed in the book, he asked them, so where did you learn this trade? And they said, there is no book, there is no course, there is no, and that's kind of what triggered the whole book and this whole kind of mega deals movement. So because the thing is, dialogue technique alone, dialogue techniques are important, like the Challenger and whatever you're using, but that alone doesn't help you orchestrate, right? It's understanding the components of orchestration. And I kind of won't go through all of it. It's all in the book, like, stakeholder mapping, ecosystem understanding, the Trojan horses, and, the risk mitigation and all the stuff that we're writing about in the book. You can kind of read it all there. So you need to understand the components of what is required to orchestrate a deal, not just go and sell, right? So because if you're selling if you're a Spotify or a Netflix, you kind of don't need salespeople, right? People just go online and download it and, done. But in the high deal complexity space, you do need a good Rainmaker. Like just using marketing techniques and stuff alone doesn't cut it. Like you need an orchestrator, right? So, yep.
I know. I was just going to say. So, are you seeing like are companies organizing around pods, or is there a certain structure that then emerges here? I'm thinking, for example, we've seen a lot of companies that are now starting to work, especially for their post-sales teams, with a pod that might have an account manager, a customer support person, a customer success person, maybe a marketing person, all in a pod, either for a region or something like that. Is that something that the Megadeals community is looking at as well?
Yeah, so good question. So the first thing you need is, if you don't have the Rainmaker, you have a problem, right? So you need the Rainmaker. And the Rainmaker orchestrates. They orchestrate both the client organization, but then to your point, the internal organization, right? So that's the first thing. The second thing that we talk about, is a couple of things, right? Is that you need to scale that Rainmaker through media. We've talked about that, right? So how do I help that Rainmaker to build brand awareness, positioning, and curiosity by targeting the ecosystem with hyper-targeted media? That's a way of helping the Rainmaker and scale, especially in an unknown brand environment. But the third thing we talk about is take stuff off the Rainmaker. I see this so many times. Like, think about the surgeon, right? She walks into the operating room and just goes gloves on, right? Everybody, like the tools are already sterilized, the patient is already cut open, the journal is already been blah, 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 the lights are all, the only thing they do is they put the gloves on, they do their thing, and then they walk out. They don't even stitch up the patient. Somebody else does that, right? But in the rainmaking environment, the Rainmaker is preparing the tender, doing all the summaries, and, having to do, they have to kind of, sterilize the tools, put on the lights, stitch up the patient. And it's like, then how many patients do you get to operate, right? So the other thing is you need to build a very strong team around these. This is kind of what you're talking about, to take stuff off the Rainmaker. Like the Rainmaker needs to be, excuse the sports analogy, in the penalty area as much as possible, because that's the bottleneck. It's finding the really good orchestrators that's the bottleneck, right? But then you need people around them that helps them scale. So that's what we offer many of our clients is you outsource the scaling and the stuff. But you also need what you're talking about, all the other things, right? It could be, support around doing tenders, follow-up emails, booking meetings, like take stuff off the Rainmaker, build teams around the Rainmaker. And some people kind of go, well, that's not fair. Yes, it is fair. It's 100% fair, because they're the few people that can bring in the really, really big deals, which makes a massive impact on the company's both revenue and bottom line. So yeah, absolutely, if that makes sense. So kind of like the Rainmaker is really important, scaling the Rainmaker through hyper-targeted media, and then kind of like taking stuff off the Rainmakers with teams around them that's supporting them in different ways, so that they're orchestrating as much as possible.
And so to clarify, just from what we were talking about previously, so we're orienting around the Rainmaker and we're supporting the Rainmaker, but as we're building our mega deals capacity and capability, we want to eliminate the Rainmaker dependency. So we're not just dependent on that person, we're building a whole system around them.
We're building a system around them, but you're actually saying a fourth thing that I didn't actually bring up. Once you get this piece to work with the Rainmaker, the media, and the taking stuff off, right? So helping them. Then you can actually, if you're a scale up, I mean, if you're in a larger company, a lot of the stuff is already set, right? But if you're in a scale up, you then build the playbook. So what does the playbook look like for a Rainmaker that is helping a company scale, right? And then once you build the playbook, you can actually start to hire more and more, carefully hire more and more Rainmakers and make sure they're trained in the playbook. So we call them the kind of up and coming Rainmakers, if you like, right?
And a playbook is the best equivalent to a playbook would be what, like an account plan, an org chart? What would typically go into it?
Well, the playbook is kind of a lot of what I've described. So kind of how the Rainmaker operates, how the media is done around the Rainmaker, what do you take off the Rainmaker, who does what in that area. So, we try and help some of our clients. I'll give you an example with one of our clients. So they have an amazing Rainmaker, and he's one of the founders and the CEO, typical, right? And what and initially when we started to work with him, he had hired a few salespeople. And I said to him very early on, it's not going to work. And he came to me 2 months later and go, it doesn't work. They're not selling. And I'm like, exactly, because you're selling a new category and nobody knows you and you're the only one that can do it really well. So I said, what you should do instead is hire 2 people who take stuff off you. So they book your meetings, they summarize your meetings, they send stuff to the meetings. You have a person who's actually doing LinkedIn posts for you. They're writing about the companies for you. Like they're doing stuff. And then we do the hyper-targeted media for you, right? So all of a sudden this guy, he has all these people around him, kind of we're targeting and doing the hyper-targeted media. Somebody is, coming into meetings and summarizing all the meetings, sending all the summaries. Another person is helping him, create LinkedIn posts and kind of posting those posts. And all of a sudden it's like, okay, so how do we put this into a playbook? What does a Rainmaker do? How do you run the media machinery? What do the people scaling the Rainmaker do? We call them scalers. So we have that as well, the kind of scales. And it's like, what does each individual do and how should they operate in that environment?
Yeah, and it makes sense because you're then having highly specialized people, so very talented people who just do what they do best and then get support in other areas so that your Rainmaker is not sitting there, trying to run reports from the CRM or fill out some field in the Salesforce or whatever it is.
Yeah. I mean, it's like I'm sorry, it's a sports analogy, but Lionel Messi, do you know him?
Yeah.
Like he's the number one. It's like putting him in defense because we're missing a defender. I mean, that's like, why would you do that? First of all, you're going to concede goals because you're a defender. And secondly, you're not going to score any goals because you're missing Lionel Messi at the top, right? So it's.
So Bora, I want to ask about someone who's listening to this podcast and thinking, this sounds really interesting. I'm an account manager today, but I want to be a Megadeals Rainmaker. I want to step up to the bigger stage. How does someone mid-career who maybe is in a post-sales account management role, how do they orient themselves toward becoming a Megadeals Rainmaker or having this mentality? What skills do they need? How would they start on this career path?
Oh, that's a really good question, Alex.
I'm just thinking because people are going to be excited. They're like, oh, I want to do this, but maybe my company isn't of a certain scale yet, or maybe we don't have this kind of complexity in our business, or maybe it does, and I just need to figure out how do I, talk to these people? What skills do I need to be able to operate at that level?
So I think you have, so in the Megadeals book, we've kind of interviewed 60 high-performing Megadealers, and in that book, you've read it, we've kind of characterized what it is they do, what these high-performing Megadealers do that separates them from kind of the average Megadealer, right? So I would really recommend to read the book. And I'm not selling it to sell the book. We don't make money on selling the book. That's not kind of where we make our money. But I think, I would, you also said you were quite fascinated when you read the book about what's in there and it's kind of this. So I think that's a great start to kind of read the book and go, okay, so these are how the top performers in the mega deal space actually operate, right? And then I would, if you want to get into that space, right? If you're not in that space, you need to start to think differently. So one of the things that I helped me a lot. I used to work for American Express for many years, and I was surrounded by just phenomenal professionals. And I actually became head of sales quite early for the Nordics. I was like 25, so I was like full force, but I had no experience, and I was completely rough around the edges. But what I did was I surrounded myself. When I went into the sort of European leadership team, everyone was like 20 years older than me, but these guys were amazing. Like, my Lord, I was surrounded by the best of the best, right? So that's another tip I have. It's like surround yourself with really, if you want to know what an entrepreneur is like, observe an entrepreneur, work next to an entrepreneur. If you want to know what a best tennis player is like, well, observe the tennis player and work next to the tennis player. So I would really recommend to like work close to a mega dealer, like be the scaler of the mega dealer, right? So take stuff off the mega dealer, do the presentations for the mega dealer, summarize the meetings for the be in the meetings with the mega dealer, right? Observe them closely. And then you can start to take on some of these things. So that I would really recommend. But there is one final thing that I would say here, and this is, I hear a lot of people say, I want to be this and I want to be that, right? And that's great, but sometimes I realize that they're more kind of in love with the romantic notion of the end product versus the hard work that it takes to actually be one of those, right? So I have a lot of friends who go, I want to be an entrepreneur and I want to build this great company. Okay, but what I say then, why don't you spend like a week next to an entrepreneur building a successful company? And then they come back a week later and go, I don't want to do this. This is horrible.
Right. Well, it's like with your Lionel Messi example, right? Like, yeah, everybody wants to be the fancy, high-paid soccer player. You don't want to know how many hundreds of days in a row he woke up at 4 a.m. and practiced for 3, whatever it is. Yeah.
Oh my God.
So one of the things I was thinking was if I were in these shoes and I was thinking, how do I, as maybe a mid-career account manager, get into some of this mega deals orientation? The one thing that popped into my head, and I want to see if this is something that resonates with you, Bora, was my thought was go out there and find bigger problems to solve for your customers, right? Like right now, you're probably stuck with like, oh, we just sell this, so I'm just going to sell this solution or make sure it works or what have you. But if you really want to crack open your career and if you really want to crack open your potential, find the next order problem that you're actually solving for the customer. Because at the end of the day, all the mega dealers you're talking about, these are all very astute business people, right? They understand the dynamics, the economics, they know how things work, the big forces that are out there, and they have a big perspective on the world. And that's the one thing I was thinking, if I was giving someone some advice, I might say, go do that, find a bigger problem to solve. Does that land with you?
I totally agree with you. My only thing to add is make sure you are, when you're solving that problem, you're also observing somebody who's experienced, because the risk when you don't do that is you step on all the mines, right? Because when you don't know how to do something and you do it, there's a big risk you go in the wrong direction, you make a lot of mistakes and things like this. So I do completely agree with you with the caveat of, make sure you are learning and observing ideally from the best, right? If you study the best and you look at how they do and you go into meetings with them and you kind of put in the hours, after a while, you start to, okay, that's how they do this, and this is how they do that, and this is how they do that. So I would combine the two, because if you do the first one without the one I'm talking about, there's a higher risk that you kind of, it's like everything. You try something new, you don't even know where to start. And this is a really complex role. So I would do both.
Fantastic. Well, hey, Bora Brännström, thank you so much for joining us today. I think Mega Deals is such a cool and fantastic and powerful methodology and way to think about things. And I really appreciate the work that you are doing to bring this to our audience and to the entire world. And everyone who's listening, this is just such a great set of skills and mindsets to learn. I really recommend the book, the website, the podcast that these guys run. Really fantastic stuff. So thanks so much for being here, Bora.
Alex, it was an absolute pleasure talking to you as always, and thank you for having me on. Thank you.
Thank you.